This is a workshop in partnership with SCORE Southwest Missouri and the Springfield Greene County Library, reviewing bereavement leave policies and grief response procedures with our presenter, Michelle Kramer, who's the founder of Angel's Wings. And I will introduce Michelle in just a moment. Before I do that, I'd like to talk a little bit about SCORE. My name is Katie Pattison. I work for the Springfield Greene County Library District. I manage the Schweitzer Brentwood branch and also coordinate business resources for the library. If you were not aware that the library had business resources, there are a number of things that you can do for free with your library card. Market and consumer research databases. We have a very cool one called Reference Solutions where you can make mailing lists and do competitor research and things like that. Demographics Now is also another cool database we have that is just really comprehensive demographics research. And of course, meeting and co-working spaces. We have a maker space with a vinyl cutter, laser engraver, heat press, podcasting equipment, and more that can be great for kind of small batch publicity or those tech projects that you want to get done but maybe don't have the equipment to do. And then books, audiobooks, newspapers, magazines in both print and digital form. And of course, workshops just like this one. We often partner with SCORE to do workshops. So thank you everybody for being here. A little bit about our workshop today. I'll be your moderator. I'd love to have you introduce yourself in the chat so we know who all is here. Our webinar will last about 1 hour. Is that right, Michelle? About an hour is what we're...
Yeah, it may not even be that long.
Okay, an hour or less. If you've got questions, you can go ahead and add those to the chat or Q&A throughout, and we'll address them. We do send out an email within about a week of the event that'll include a recording of the event, and I don't think we have any handouts today. And then you'll also receive an evaluation email from SCORE if you would. It's a really quick 1 or 2 question evaluation. If you fill that out, it'll help us plan for future workshops. So a little bit about SCORE. SCORE is a nationwide nonprofit that's there for you for the life of your business. We offer mentoring and resources to support you from idea to exit. There are 3 things to remember that SCORE can help you with. That is free business advice and mentoring. We have some amazing mentors here in the Southwest Missouri area, but you actually have access to mentors nationwide. So if you have a very specialized industry or need, there's some great resources out there, mentors out there from SCORE. You can access the mentor request form at score.org, and that is a free service. Also, low or no cost business training, just like what we're doing today. And then on the SCORE website at score.org, there are recorded and live webinars going on all the time from SCORE chapters across the country. So whatever your need is, whatever you need information about for your business, there is likely a SCORE webinar about that. And the same goes for business templates and resources on the SCORE website. There's like a great financial projections worksheet, marketing information, blog posts, all kinds of cool stuff there. So if you haven't checked out the SCORE website, definitely do that. Just a couple upcoming workshops we have. On February 27th, we are working, actually both of these are in partnership with the Better Business Bureau. One is Living in a Digital World, Cybersecurity Basics for Business. That's in February. And then in March, we have one on financial scams, predatory debt assistance, and credit repair. Both of those are live in person at the Schweitzer Brentwood Library in Springfield. And then everything that SCORE does is possible with volunteers. Our mentors are volunteers, our workshop team is volunteers, and we're always looking for people who would love to volunteer with SCORE. It's a great group, a great way to make a difference in the local entrepreneurship community. You can fill out the volunteer application form at score.org. We have 10,000 volunteers serving clients in over 1,500 communities nationwide. Here's just those websites again, score.org/volunteer if you're interested in volunteering. This is our local chapter website, swmissouri.score.org, that lists our local workshops and mentors. And now I would like to introduce our presenter, Michelle Kramer. Michelle founded On Angel's Wings in 2013 after seeing a need to serve families in the community. OAW seeks to improve the mental health and wellness of families with medically fragile children through therapeutic photography and grief recovery services free of charge. In the last decade, the organization has provided over 1,000 photo sessions to nearly 800 families serving the state of Missouri and beyond with nearly 75 active volunteer photographers. In 2020, Michelle became an advanced certified grief recovery method specialist in order to better serve the families the organization encounters. In June 2022, Michelle wrote and published Unshattered Grief, Helping Others Through Loss Without Breaking Them Again. She desires to change the way society handles someone grieving, allowing them the space to do so without limitations or expectations. This passion led her to start providing training and consulting on handling bereaved employees, including evaluation of HR bereavement leave policies and aiding managerial staff on appropriate response strategies. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
I will go ahead and
Yeah.
turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I even have numbers to update since I gave
I,
you my bio for on Angels Wings, which is really exciting. Okay, so I'm going to this is how you get to see my face now, and then at the end, and then I'm going to do a slideshow for everybody. So really my motivation here is supporting grieving employees. Um, and as she mentioned, I am founder and executive director of On Angels Wings and an advanced certified grief recovery method specialist and author. Just a little bit more about On Angels Wings. As she mentioned, we work with families that have medically fragile children or who lose a child at birth. Our first touch point is providing them with professional photography, and then we provide continued mental health and wellness support through the entirety of their journey. None of that is costs them anything. Um, we just did our annual report for 2023. We did 453 photo sessions, which compared to 2022, that was 267. So we've seen almost a doubling in our services over the last year. And then we have now surpassed 1,500 sessions total in our 10 years of existence. So there's definitely a need for the services that we provide. This has given me a long standing relationship with families that are grieving and seeing kind of how society handles the way they grieve, including their employers. I'm also the author of Unshattered Grief, Helping Others Through Loss Without Breaking Them Again, which is available on Amazon in both paperback, Kindle, and audio versions. This is more directed towards society in general, not necessarily on the business end, but I am working towards creating a similar book that is directed towards business owners. So just getting right into it, 100% of us will experience tremendous loss at some point in our lives. It's an inevitable fact of nature. Another reality is that 1/3 of our waking hours are spent in the workspace. That percentage is based upon a 40-hour work week, although many industries have spent more time in the job force. Any way you approach it, an employee who may be grieving the loss of a loved one is spending a large portion of their time at work. And if your company is not a safe place for a grieving employee, the ramifications can be detrimental to the employee, but also to equally hard on your bottom line. Crossover is inevitable. Currently, there is no federal law regarding bereavement leave, unlike maternity leave under the FMLA Act. There has been movement towards such a law, but it's slow. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022 established a new paid bereavement benefit for federal civil employees, which provided 2 weeks of paid bereavement leave for the death of a child. There was some work towards a Build Back Better proposal that Biden put forward, but Forbes said that really didn't go anywhere. As such, only 5 states have a bereavement leave law: Washington, Oregon, California, Illinois, and Maryland. The Oregon Family Leave Act provides up to 2 weeks of paid leave per family member in a 1-year time period. In Maryland, a maximum of 5 working days may be used from the employee's sick leave for the death of an immediate family member. California actually joined the fray in January of 2023, and they have determined that an employer cannot prevent an eligible employee from taking up to 5 days of bereavement leave for the death of a loved one. City municipalities and counties nationwide have laws regarding bereavement leave, of course, but they typically set around 3 to 5 days of unpaid leave. Most prominently, however, is in the example of large corporations, such as Meta, formerly known as Facebook. Um, they have appeared to set the standard in about February of 2017. They extended the bereavement leave policy to 20 days of paid leave for an immediate family member and up to 10 days for an extended family member. MasterCard followed suit in May of 2017. In November of 2022, JP Morgan Chase increased bereavement leave to 20 days paid leave for the death of a spouse, domestic partner, child, miscarriage, or stillbirth. And of course, other companies have joined the fray. But the question, of course, remains is how does this apply to a small business? You know, when you're talking about small business, it's a lot easier for these large corporations, of course, to provide multiple days off, a couple of weeks, etc., for their employees because there's a lot of people to fill in the gaps. So where does that leave small businesses as far as how they can appropriately respond to their grieving employees and give them the space they need to recover? Well, the average time off, typically unpaid, for an employee who has lost a loved one is 3 to 5 days. This is kind of across the board, even in small businesses. However, things to consider are that planning and executing a funeral takes an average of 5 to 7 days. A lot going into that, depending on whether the employee is, the in charge of the estate for the person that has passed away. There's going to be a lot more. So you're talking about all of their time off may be spent planning and executing a funeral, and there's no time for them to spend grieving on their own and really dealing with the impact of that loss. Returning to work without the opportunity to begin the grieving process will, of course, impact productivity. Um, if an employee returning to work too early will not perform to their previous standards. Um, Failing to give them enough time may result in mistakes because grief, of course, has an inevitable brain fog that sets in. And mistakes, of course, can be detrimental to your bottom line. The average time, like I said, is 3 to 5 days, but Harvard research found that productivity loss from distraction is 5 times higher than it is of absenteeism. So talking about that brain fog, if they're distracted, if they're, sitting in their grief, they haven't had time to at least start the process of coping and recovering, then they're 5 times the productivity loss is 5 times higher than if they were just gone. So if you had the opportunity to give them extra days off, you're going to lose less money than if you brought them home back to the office too early and their productivity is suffering. So these things to keep in mind as we're looking at bereavement leave policies and discussing, the impacts that grief has on your employees. Is there a written policy for your business? Is the most important thing, the number one thing you need to examine. And if there is it being adhered to consistently, or is it the same for every employee? Are different employees, managerial staff, getting different time off than for a loss than say one of your, back of house employees? And why is that? Also, something to consider: does your bereavement leave policy include birth loss, miscarriage, failed adoptions, etc.? Um, Specifically, I'm thinking about one story I heard from one of our families. They had a stillbirth, and her husband, while she was a stay-at-home mom, her husband had to use earned time off for the funeral, but that was all that he had available. So he ended up taking off extra time to help prepare for the funeral, to help his wife recover from a C-section that she had to have for the delivery. She said that his, coworkers and managers or boss were all very kind, but the company's guidelines and rules were not clear. His boss tried to push for at least paternity, like partial paternity leave, but he was told that he was not able to take it because the company handbook stated that paternity leave was to take care of a new child, and they didn't have a child at home to take care of under those circumstances. So just looking at what your bereavement leave policy says in regard to those kind of things is really important because 1 in 160 pregnancies ends in stillbirth, and 1 in 4 families will deal with miscarriage. So at that rate, it definitely needs to be part of your written policy. Also, how is that policy communicated? Is it just in the handbook? Is the bereaved employee responsible for finding out what that policy is in the midst of their grief? Or is that something that is made clear to your employees um, on a regular basis upon hire? Are they seeing that policy in an action with their coworkers? And if there's no policy, how is bereavement leave handled? What are you doing when an employee has a loss? Are you looking at each employee's individual situation? Why is there no written policy? There absolutely should be a written policy. And then again, does your policy cover losses like stillbirth or miscarriage, failed adoption, failed infertility treatments? All of these have a huge impact on both parents, and um, there's a lot of hopes and expectations surrounding all of these incidences, and that does take time to recover. The next question being, how are you approaching a grieving employee? What are you saying to them? What are you how do they feel around you? Are they comfortable? Do they feel like they can talk to you? These are important things to look at. The reality is that no one knows what to say. Our society does not handle the griever well. We want to help, but few know how. And I've been working with bereaved families for over 16 years, so there's a lot of stories that go along with this. One of the things that you often might say to someone is, it could be worse. This is usually heard between coworkers, right? That's why it's really important to train your employees on how to handle a grieving coworker. These are the things that are often said between peers. At least you have other children. The situation could be worse. You could have dealt with, a house fire on top of it. There's a lot of things that people try to say to try and bring clarity and positivity to their coworkers. But these statements do not bring comfort. It actually minimizes the griever's loss because you're comparing it to something else, and it's not as bad as this could be. And it tells them to move on or suppress what they're feeling because they have things they should be thankful for, and these things are not separate. You can be thankful and grieving at the same time, but this encourages a griever to not do both. I'm sorry for your loss. Now, this is anybody can say this, of course, as someone who owns the business in a managerial position, what have you. This is kind of our default as a society because we don't know what to say. So we say that, I'm sorry for your loss. But this often isn't received well. I've heard this multiple times from the families that we have served. It has a vacant disconnection from action. It's taking, I'm sorry, takes responsibility, but you actually had nothing to do with the situation they're in. While most people mean, I don't like that you're going through this. It's really terrible. It comes off more patronizing to the griever, that there's as if something could be done to change it. And it's most grievers that I've talked to feel like it's forced empathy. It's not sincere, or it will get better or easier with time. Um, the reality is that grief has no timeline. All of the families that we serve are going to be grieving the loss of their child for the rest of their lives because there's a hole there. There's somebody missing. Um, Someone who loses their spouse has to go through the rest of their life without them present. Somebody they've shared their life with for as long as they can remember. Essentially, there's just a lot of things that continue to impact a griever, and it's not something they just get over eventually. But in saying this to someone who's grieving a tremendous loss, it does give them a false sense of hope, even subconsciously, that eventually it won't hurt so badly. It might stop altogether. If it's going to get better or easier with time, that means it's going to stop, right? Let me know if you need anything. This is as common, I think, as I'm sorry for your loss, but this is to a griever the sentiment of inaction. It puts the burden of follow up on the griever, and in most cases, they have no idea what they want. They don't even have the capacity to reach out. Instead, you can say things like, "How can I help?" which means that you're already committed to helping. You're not waiting on them to take action. You're already in. You're already committed. Take action without asking for their direction. If you're close enough to someone, don't wait to be asked. In the business world, this might look like you've got somebody taking on part of the load of their work as they return so that they can slowly move back into that. Or while they're gone, someone is sharing that burden before they return so they're not coming back to something heavy. One story that I recall is a woman who often brought in special needs children and fostered and adopted them. One of those children passed away in the hospital, and she did have intermittent FMLA benefits due to his chronic illness. Um, but on that last time he went into the hospital on a Friday, he was declared brain dead on Monday, and they removed the ventilator on Wednesday. So she took that whole week and the 2 following weeks off of work. She said her coworkers were amazing. They brought her food, they checked on her. But when she came back to work, no one had been able to do anything to help her clients while she was gone, so that she was 3 weeks behind from the moment she got back on messages and work, etc. She says, I was never really able to catch up. Depression and never feeling like I could be honest about that situation just made me slip further behind and stressed me more each month. So she eventually quit, feeling unsupported and like there was no hope of being successful in that position again. So, as a business owner, one way you could take action would be to set something up for while they're gone where they don't come back to an overwhelm of work they can never catch up on. It's also understanding boundaries. Um, Simple tasks for a grieving individual can be overwhelming. So it's really, we're going to talk about that more too, where it's really setting expectations for them and for the people around them. Um, their coworkers might expect that they'll continue to go to lunch once a week like they all do together, and they may not be willing to do that. And really just having coworkers that understand those boundaries is really important. So what should you say to someone who's grieving and under your employment? What you're going through is awful. I can't begin to understand. Even somebody who has suffered a similar loss, just hasn't lived the life that your employee has. So nobody can really truly understand what they're going through because no one's experienced their life. So really just acknowledging that we don't understand is really important. And acknowledging that you don't know what to say is also really important. As an employer, telling them that they can approach you if something is getting overwhelming and that you will do what you can to help them is huge. Giving them that safe space to say, okay, I know that my boss is going to appreciate my situation and allow me to talk to them about it. It's really, this allows employees to give information ahead of time. Also, if an immediate relative is sick or an imminent loss may be impacting their availability. So opening that space up before a loss even occurs is really vital. Part of creating that safe space is refraining from a major investigation into the facts of an employee's loss as well. An investigation may be necessary only when an employee has called in multiple times in a short window for multiple deaths, but trusting employees to be honest will help them to feel safe expressing grief and struggling upon their return to work. So it's really important that you create that safe space. So, what does that look like? That moderation of expectations and discussing what those expectations are with your employees. It's really imperative that that's something you do. It starts with a private conversation, giving the employees space to express any performance limitations they may be concerned about, but without repercussion or fear of losing their job when they're being honest with you. So again, that comes back to creating that safe space, right? So one expectation we might have is back to work, everything is normal, but the reality truly is that productivity will suffer, as we mentioned as I mentioned earlier, distracted employees are, the productivity loss is 5 times greater than their absenteeism. So giving them that space to do it well is really important, and verbalizing that there's grace for them, that there is a space for them to work around things that are overwhelming them, that they, again, have the freedom to discuss those things with you, that they will engage like before, that the person that who was, the most outspoken in team meetings or had the greatest ideas was super innovative and creative with new approaches, or again, going to lunch with their coworkers once a week, they might actually end up being more closed off or reclusive. I actually have an example of someone told me that their employer, they worked all of the time. They worked weekends, it was optional, and they worked weekends all of the time. And then his father died, and he and his father weren't that close, but he had to go out of town, prepare a funeral, do all of these things, and through that process realized, I'm spending all of my time away from my children. I don't want the same thing for them. So he stopped working weekends. Um, the problem there was an expectation that he was going to engage like before, he was going to continue working weekends, and he was actually demoted because he chose to stop working weekends even though it was told to him that it was optional. So really creating that space um, of expectations not being the exact same as they were before, and maybe giving them space to have flexibility in how they return, whether that's so many days a week they're returning or their workload is less while they return and kind of get their bearings again. That again, productivity should not suffer, but grief causes brain fog, distractions. Again, adjusting responsibilities, enlisting help for them, flex schedule to reboot themselves back into their position. Adjusting responsibilities might look like, if it's somebody in your, managerial staff, maybe they don't serve as manager every 5 days like they normally do. Maybe they're serving as manager 3 days a week. Maybe part of their managerial duties are taken off their plate. They're not having to do the schedule anymore. Maybe that was part of their responsibilities, and now they don't have to do the schedule anymore. Somebody else is going to do that until they feel like they can take on that again. So it's just giving them the space maybe to pull back a little bit. The reality is that supporting grieving employees goes beyond providing just that adequate bereavement leave policy. And it's about being clear about those policies, being clear about expectations, how a griever in your employee is handled on a personal level is vital to their recovery as well. That's why it's really important. I feel like that managers have training on effectively responding to a grieving employee while maintaining appropriate boundaries in that working relationship. Training staff on handling and supporting their grieving coworkers will aid in fostering a safe work environment for that griever. Inevitably, everyone experiences at least one significant loss while working a full-time job. The employees at your company are no exception to that. Employee retention is a priority for all of us right now. So taking that extra step provides a place where employees want to stay. It means going that extra mile to be supportive of them. There's this unspoken predisposition to remain disconnected from personal matters in the workplace, especially in relationships between management or bosses, owners, and their employees. Rather than finding a balance to serve employees best, the topic of grief is generally avoided, or there's a lack of true understanding in which management fails to greet the griever with unrealistic expectations for recovery, and saying things that may end up quite hurtful to them. And there's logistics at play too. Let's not forget that in this post-COVID world, society had an epiphany, and employees are seeking happiness in their jobs, not just a paycheck. So with finding new employees being increasingly difficult, it's really imperative that employers and companies do everything that they can to create a work environment that fosters retention. And this is one of those spaces. You may not even know it, but somebody in your employ is grieving right now. Um, Sometimes it's not super apparent. Sometimes it's not as evident as a close family member dying. There could be a lot going on in their life, and while you definitely want to keep those boundaries in mind, um, creating that safe space for them is just imperative. Um, it's simply a matter of compassion. If a place where a griever spends 1/3 to half of their waking moments is not a safe place where they can feel supported and work toward healing, then they won't perform adequately and they may not stay. So this is kind of where I come in. I'm not trying to do a huge plug or anything like that for sure, but I do offer consulting for HR departments on bereavement leave policies, taking a look at what they're providing and how that's communicated and how that can better serve your employees, and what works for your business as far as what you can afford to give them as far as time off, etc. I also offer training for staff so that they can respond to grieving coworkers in an appropriate way, and training to management on the same so that they can, as I said, set adequate boundaries, maintain that um, relationship in a professional manner, but also give grievers a safe space. So yeah, less than an hour for sure. um, but I am definitely open to any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That's really useful info.
Absolutely.
I have a couple employees myself who have had some losses recently, and there's not a lot of guidance out there on that about
Yeah,
how to, we have policies and everything, but I appreciate the information. If you've got
sure.
questions, you can add them to the Q&A or the chat. So we'll give just a moment to do that. I think the chat had some issues earlier, but I think I've resolved those. So you should be able to type in it now. Give just a moment for those questions to come in or comments. Okay. Thanks, Sheila. Shayna, thank you.
Appreciate it, both of you.
Okay. So, not seeing any questions come through. So we will send out a follow-up email that includes the recording to this, and we can include Michelle's contact info, should you want to reach out to her with questions that you come up with afterwards or need information about her services or anything like that. Otherwise, we'll end for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here on this cold, snowy
Yeah,
day.
I appreciate you all.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.